introduce what connected vehicle is to the public.
We're back now with something the feds say could be a game changer in reducing the number of fatalities on our roads if it works and if everyone pulls together.
Well, as Jim is putting out that video, I'm just explaining a little bit. It's basically a technology using a dedicated spectrum for a vehicle to communicate with another vehicle or with the infrastructure. For example, if I'm driving my car and someone in my blind spot, if I want to turn right, I couldn't really see the car, but somehow my car will give me an alert that someone is in my blind spot. Or if I'm driving my car too fast, I'm gonna hit another vehicle. The other vehicle is slowing down, and I didn't notice that my vehicle will give me an alert in real time, telling me that I'm fast approaching a vehicle. Or if I'm approaching an intersection, my car will tell me, we call it signal time and phasing of the intersection. Basically, tell me, how many minutes or seconds to green or to red. I can adjust my speed accordingly based on those alerts or those recommendations. This is in a nutshell what V2V technology or V2I technology are, and this has been the largest research effort within research.
We're back now with something the feds say could be a game changer in reducing the number of fatalities on our roads if it works and if everyone pulls together. The government announced today it's working towards requiring all cars to talk to each other to warn of road dangers ahead or crashes about to happen. Our report tonight from NBC's Tom Costello.
After decades of focusing on surviving a car crash, the government today announced a dramatic shift in focus, beginning the process to one day require new cars to come with technology to avoid a crash before it happens. Much like collision avoidance systems used in planes. On the ground, it's called vehicle-to-vehicle or V2V communication. Each car, truck, or bus on the road constantly transmitting a 360-degree status report through a Wi-Fi system to every other nearby vehicle on the road, constantly updating its position, its speed, whether it's turning or braking. If a car ahead suddenly brakes, everyone behind it gets an alert. I had a LED screen across the front to warn me my seat is rumbling. We were in Ann Arbor, Michigan with Ford engineers 18 months ago for a one-year DOT test involving 3,000 cars. A flashing light warns of a car in your blind spot. If you signal you're going to change lanes anyway, alarms go off and your seat vibrates. I feel this rumble really catches your attention, the rumble of the seat. All the warnings went off when I pulled up to a green light, but a car on my left was moving too quickly to stop at his red. If I hadn't hit the brakes, he would have T-boned me.
Exactly. This is one of the most fatal crashes obviously out there.
While airbags and safer cars have helped cut the fatal accident rate by 22% over the past 10 years, 30,000 people still die on the roads each year. Today, the government said V2V technology could cut by up to 80% the number of unimpaired accidents.
It is the game-changing potential to avoid a crash in the first place.
Already, many cars come with sensors and radars that warn drivers, even slam on the brakes, as technology helps reduce the chance for human error. Tom Costello, NBC News, Washington.
Just add one last note on that. U.S. NHTSA is in the middle of potential mandate over light vehicles. Probably starting from a few years later, all light vehicles are going to be equipped with some sort of V2V technology. So in the middle of mandate that. All right, questions, please.
Is there enough bandwidth? If all these cars have these send out all these signals, is there enough bandwidth to handle all that?
So this band, as you saw, is a 5.9 gigahertz dedicated band, and bandwidth is 75 megahertz. This is a dedicated band, and it's reserved for ITS only. and it's reserved for vehicle communication as a priority.
What distance? That's what's cut into.
Agree. Yeah, I'm gonna come to that later. Yeah. So the distance of a DSRC communication is 300 to 1,000 feet. Yeah, as probably you guys are professional in this field, and this is my research area as well. The distance, the communication range, and communication rate determine the spectrum usage. And as itself, if only DSRC nodes use the spectrum, it should be enough. But the catch is in some congested area, there might be some congestion issue, channel congestion issue. This is still being resolved, and in NIST's report, it acknowledged this being an issue. And I used to do a lot of simulation in this field, and in simulations, you can see that in some rare cases, there could be some problem. But also keep in mind, also in those traffic scenarios, our vehicle density is pretty high, so the vehicle speed is also lower. So potentially, if you lose some packages in that environment, the negative impact is not as much.
One of the things we discussed was real-time transit information systems. Transit is a big issue in Montgomery County right now. There are apps that you can get for your phone that can tell you about the buses. However, I was out with a group of people last night and ended up talking about the transit system. And two fellows were telling us how they use this application here in Montgomery County. But the application is based around a schedule. And one fellow was explaining that on Rockville Pike, by Governor, because it's based around a schedule, in the afternoon, when traffic really flows, the buses come much earlier than the application indicates.
Yeah.
Okay?
Not just Rockville Pike,
What?
not just Rockville Pike.
Okay.
Well, the problem is that what they're doing is just giving you the scheduled time, not
Yes.
real-time information.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the real issue, yes, I mean, I can
That
understand.
they claim it's real
That's
time, but it's
what-
not.
So here we are planning all of this. What is the cost to put? I mean, one thing is to say we have the technology to do this, but what would be the costs? I mean, has anybody been researching the DOT to start to put a signaling device on every bus that integrates all this across the county so we can maintain what the actual real-time transit information is? Is your group doing estimates on, you got 300 buses, what it costs to keep a system like that going?
So we are not doing this, but I'm going to say that from my perspective, the hardware cost is not as high as people would think, because this is called AVL system in ITS. All you need is real-time location of your bus. You need a GPS, and probably you need a cell phone or some others to communicate with the server. It's not as that expensive. The flip side of the story is
Why haven't they done it then?
the flip side of the story is I'm gonna say that we work with some transit agencies, and I was constantly reminded that how sort of budget constrained they are. And even though in this case, I would say many ITS technologies are relatively expensive because there needs a lot of infrastructure investment. But this real-time bus information, to my mind, doesn't require as much financial investment, but they are so much financially constrained. I guess that's the reason. I don't have a number, but I don't consider it to be
Excuse me,
very
guys, I
much.
think we're running late here, so we still have a third speaker to go. Adrian, if you wouldn't mind hanging around.
Thanks.
something, maybe-
I'll be around. I'll be around
Okay.
after. Yeah, I will take your question after.
Okay.
Yeah. For something completely different, we're actually going to have another speaker coming from Houston, Texas. Let's see, here's his screen's coming up. Christof, are you there? Hello?
I'm here.
Great. Well, do an introduction. Christof Spieler is P-E-L-E-D-A-P, a board member of the Metropolitan Transit Authority of Harris County, Texas, which is Houston. Vice President Morris Architects, he's Director of Planning for the Houston office, working on a variety of public and private client projects and heard firm-wide efforts on building information modeling, spoken extensively on BIM at regional and national conferences. He has written and spoken extensively on transit and urban planning and has helped Houston neighborhoods shape transportation projects. His articles appeared in Site Magazine. He served on the committee from 98 to 2010, including 2 years as chair, Houston Chronicle and Architecture Magazine. He also covers Houston transportation in his blog, Intermodality. Among other things, he is also a consulting structural engineer. His projects have won multiple American Institute of Architects awards. He's been featured on the cover of National Engineering Magazine. He teaches structures at the Rice University School of Architecture. And he's a licensed professional engineer in the state of Texas. So maybe he could help us out with the Silver Spring Transit Center while he's here. Anyway, the reason I was interested in him was that I happened to read an article about what was going on in Houston, Texas, as far as their transit system. And Mr. Spieler has basically championed what's called reimagining transit, where what they have done is through data-driven analyses, looked at their population centers and their job centers in Houston and completely redesigned the transit systems there so that, believe it or not, in their core service area, buses will be traveling on a 15-minute frequency, including Sundays, because they realize that people actually use transit for things more than just going to work. Many of the existing transit riders will still be using the same bus stops, and 99% will be within a quarter mile of a bus stop. One of the more radical things is in the neighborhoods where the streets are curvilinear and access to buses is more restrictive, is that the drivers will be allowed in those selected areas to deviate for on-demand pickups and drop-offs, thereby making transit more accessible to people where the street layouts are a little more difficult. And the magical thing about all of this is that they're doing it by reallocating some of their existing resources, about 25% of their budget, so that they're actually doing this with no new money. And consequently, I may be a little bit off my time, but they're going from planning to implementation in a period of about 18 months. Okay?
Let's hear from Christof.
Okay, Mr. Spieler. Sir.
Yes, it is. And I think you've done a really good job giving my presentation for me. Thank you for the great introduction. I come to you from Houston, Texas, and just as a little bit of comparison here in Montgomery County versus the Houston metro area. Our transit agency, we've got about 1,200 buses, 37 light rail vehicles on 2 light rail lines with 2 more about to open. And we're carrying about 280,000 people on an average weekday. So if you look at the comparison here to Montgomery County, you'll see we're actually not that far off. Now, I'm probably not what you think of when you think of Houston. This is a picture of my commute. I live in an urban loft. I get on a light rail train, and I ride about 10 blocks to my work at North Architects there in the distance. I pretty much have the best commute in Houston. But part of the reason we embarked on this project is that wasn't always my commute. I used to actually work out in the suburbs and ride the number 9 bus, which is a very typical Houston local bus. It runs, say, every half hour during rush hour, every 45 minutes or hour during midday. On time some of the time, not on time a lot of the time. I actually really loved riding the bus. It was a really great experience. It gave me more time in my day, but I also realized what it's really like to depend on the system. And when I got on the board, one of the things we realized is our bus ridership has been dropping steadily for a long time. That we lost about 2% of ridership a year overall on the system, but that loss is pretty much all due to local buses. Light rail was gaining ridership, parking lot buses were gaining ridership, local buses losing ridership. And you'd think that might be because we were dropping service, but that wasn't the case. If you look at that blue line, that's the amount of service hours Metro was actually operating. So operating more service and carrying fewer people is a pretty good sign that something was wrong. And so that leads to the question of why weren't more people riding our bus service? And let me tell you why, because I think there's a couple of really crucial reasons. The first is almost all of our bus routes are in Houston. This is the Washington Avenue corridor. This is right into downtown Houston, dense, mixed-use, perfect transit corridor. If you look at these frequencies, in the morning, the bus runs every 10 or 15 minutes. That's great, but by the time you get to midday, it's once an hour. And if you get to the evening, that frequency really peters out pretty quickly. That's pretty typical of the system. If you look at this map right here, the routes in red are routes that run every 15 minutes or better all day. This is our current system right here. And that 15 minutes is a really important cut. 15-minute frequency means you don't have to plan your life around the bus. You can just show up at a bus stop and know that on average you're only waiting 7 minutes till the next bus. 15-minute frequent bus routes means you don't have to look at a schedule. You can go when you want to go. That frequent means you're living your life based on the bus schedule. And if you look at this map, you'll see very few frequent routes and a large number of half-hourly and a large number of hourly routes. Now, that's probably very familiar to you. If you look at the Montgomery County system, it is a very similar picture. A relatively small number of frequent routes and a large number of infrequent ones. And that really drives the experience. Second problem, the bus is confusing. One of my favorite routes here in Houston, the number 40. At the left, at the north end, you'll see two different branches. They come together to run into downtown. After the bus runs through downtown, it has an express portion where a couple of buses a day take the freeway. The rest of them take the local route. What that means is if you catch the wrong bus, you might accidentally find yourself speeding right by your neighborhood without stopping. And then at the bottom end, you'll see three different branches, all of which are one-way loops, all of which run on the same street in different directions. I have not yet actually been able to figure out the service pattern by looking at the bus ticket. This works if you take the exact same bus at the exact same time every day. If you don't understand the system, you're going to have a really hard time using this. Another example, here's downtown Houston, different bus routes. Each color doesn't represent one bus route, it actually represents multiple routes on the same pattern. I have no idea how you could possibly read on purpose. Ride the same bus every day, you know what to do with fun. If you don't, you're really going to have a hard time figuring this out. And once again, probably something that's familiar to you. I have a hard time looking at this bus route and figuring out where any of these actually go. Looking at this, as somebody who doesn't ride the system, how would you actually figure out how to take a bus? The bus is indirect. This is one of my favorite examples in Houston. This is a bus route down one street. It's called Richmond. It changes its name to Wheeler. Major employment center one end, university at the other. For some reason, you have to take 3 bus routes to make a trip that's less than 15 minutes driving. And you'll notice how far out of your way they take you. Very common with these bus systems that if you want to get somewhere, you're finding yourself going to someplace else entirely in order to find your way there. Another good example of the outer edges of our system, look at that number 45 and number 46 in the center there. You want to get between those two routes, think of how many connections you've got to make to get. It's simply not logical. And a lot of our riders are going far out of their way to make the connections they want to make. The bus doesn't run on the weekends. Here's our frequency on a weekday. Here's a Saturday. Here's a Sunday. As you look at this, notice how those high-frequency routes just disappear, and notice that entire neighborhoods drop off the map. There's 2 big problems with this. The first is, if you are going to depend on transit, you need transit not just to get to work, but you need transit to do all the other things you're going to do. You need transit to get to church, you need transit to get to the store, you need transit to get to the restaurant for brunch on Sunday morning. And the second problem is, somebody has to work at that grocery store on a Sunday morning. There's an awful lot of jobs that aren't 9 to 5, and we're not serving those jobs well at all. We're still basing our transit systems around the idea that everybody works 5 days a week, not that people are working shifts. And this just simply doesn't fit our world anymore. And the bus doesn't go where people actually need to go. Here's a map of population density in Houston of people's bus routes, you'll notice that some of the densest neighborhoods don't have frequent service. That's because these bus routes were planned for what places were 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, and they haven't been adjusted to keep up with the regional change around it. And that's very much true for employment centers as well. We have typically a third of the people who work in downtown Houston or the Texas Medical Center use trains to get to work. But if you look at some of these newer, more suburban employment centers, you're seeing 5%, 7%, 2%. That's because the bus network doesn't serve those other employment centers. So I just told you that we're running a really bad bus network. And you might ask, why in the world is that what this system is like? Well, here's one of my favorite examples. This is the 11-man bus in Houston. And you'll notice that name, man. This bus is actually descended from a 1920 streetcar route. And here's what that route looks like. In yellow is the full extent of Main Street. In black is that streetcar. And you'll notice that Nance is a really obvious name for this. The streetcar ran the entire length of the street. They connected that street to downtown Houston. Here is that same route today. You'll notice over time it got extended, it got diverted to meet more destinations, and when they built the interstate highway system, Main Street got disconnected and the bus got rerouted, so that at this point the bus is still called Nance, but it's only on that street for 3 blocks. This is what happens when you design a system by asking the route planners to make adjustments for certain destinations, but to change the system as little as possible. Every individual step makes sense, but over time they add up to something that doesn't make any sense. So we ask a really big question. What would our bus system look like if we just reimagined that entire system from a clean sheet of paper? We have a lot of data about where people live and where people work, and we know where every single boarding on the system takes place. And GPS links fare boxes here. So we have a lot of data to base that on. And secondly, we went and we brought some of the key stakeholders in a room. In this room are people representing all sorts of government agencies, public works, other smaller transit agencies. There's people representing hospitals, community colleges, universities, the handicapped community, people representing all sorts of neighborhoods, advocates for the low income. Basically, we put everyone in a room and said, we need you to help us figure out what kind of bus system we need. And finally, we said we don't have unlimited resources. This is about using the resources we already have and using them as effectively as possible. So what does that allow us to do? What I'm about to show you here is the system that will be on the ground in August. So this isn't long-range planning. This is a process we started less than 2 years ago, and the results will be on the ground in August. So first of all, more frequency. Here once again, the current network in terms of frequency. Watch the red route. Here's the network we're going to have on the ground in August. Essentially the same amount of resources. You notice how transformational that is in terms of how many people are served by that frequent service. It's a system that's much easier to understand. On the left is Shepherd Drive today. You'll notice a single street served by about 5 different bus routes, all of which means it's still missing section of the street. On the right, the new route. A single route runs the entire length of the street. This is the kind of thing that you don't need a map to be able to understand that. I can explain that route to you in one sentence. It's more direct. We're basically setting up a grid, and the great thing about a grid is you can travel from any point on that grid to any other point on that grid without taking a detour. So once again, current network here, these are just a frequent route. Notice how everything's radial, everything's routing you through downtown. That doesn't make sense in a place that has multiple activities. Instead, here's the grid. Any place on there, a series of north-south routes, a series of east-west routes, any place on that, you can get to another place with an intuitive direct connection that will get you there. This is much more powerful than a radial network, and you can really see the kind of freedom this gives you for moving around the city. And once again, the example from earlier, here's that old bus connection, here's the new one. We now have a bus that stays on that street for its entire length and simply hit it. The new network is also a 7-day-a-week network. Here's the existing network once again, weekday, Saturday, the new network 7 days a week. We're going to run the same frequency on a Sunday morning that we do on a weekday on a Monday on every single route. Every route will be a 7-day-a-week route, and the routes that are frequent on a weekday are going to be frequent on the week. So what does that mean? It means that right now we've got a quarter of our riders who are at a stop which gets 15-minute service 7 days a week. We're taking that up to 75%. And at the same time, 93% of our riders can board at the exact same stop they board at today. We've essentially lost no coverage at all. It goes to show you how inefficient the current system is. And what that means is we end up with a much faster system. We looked at trip times using 30 different destinations, and 28% of those trips were faster by 20 minutes or more, 68 faster by 10 minutes or more. That's a huge difference. You look at this trip, for example, 10 trips in order to go west, you've got to head east. Connecting downtown, head back out to a suburban employment center. Total time, 89 minutes. New trip, much better connection location between two frequent routes, 50 minutes. That's a 40-minute one-way time saving. Multiply that by 2, multiply that by 5, and you can see what the potential is. We talk a lot about transportation and what it really means. And the basic argument here is that mobility is quality of life, except I would argue it's not that simple. Clearly, we have to get around. The quality of the life that we live is based on all the different things we can do, but the goal of our life is not to travel. This is not what people learn for. The goal of our life is actually to get somewhere. So mobility isn't quality of life access. You can think of access as the places you can get to in a given amount of time. And there's really 2 ways we can improve access. The first is keep moving faster. The larger we make that circle, the more destinations are within it. And we have spent a lot of money doing it. We've laid a lot of concrete in the bus for that. And even in transit, that's a lot of what we've done. There's the HOV bus network. It's really about moving people as fast as possible so they can move further in that same amount of time. And that can be a great thing. In Houston, for example, those express buses mean that a third of the people who work downtown ride transit, and that's largely because we provided that really good service out to the customers. But that's not the only way to increase access. High density does the same thing. If we take the circle we have and we can fit more things in it, that means you can get to more of those things. It's not how far you travel, it's how many things you can get to. And that's where the car has inherent limitations. Here's a chunk of Houston. Now let's subtract all the space devoted to cars, and we'll notice that only a minority of that space is actually available for the things we're actually trying to get to and the things that actually generate economic activity. That's why the downtowns of the world, the dense stop centers, all rely on transit. It's much more effective. But we've been tending to think that we can do that only by building rail, like here in Tyson's Corner. What I'm suggesting is that buses can do the same thing. You think about that current frequent network. This is a zone of access. This is a zone of freedom. This is where you could move about with a bus without having to look at the schedule anytime you want. And here's what we're doing in terms of that zone. Just compare that, what that really means. We're essentially doubling the number of people who have frequent access to their homes, 50% increase in the number of jobs. We've got 1 million people and 1 million jobs on that network. And you compare that across the country, and you see that on a weekday, that's actually one of the best frequent bus networks in the country, and on a weekend, it's absolutely phenomenal. And when you really start to think about what this means, it means a lot of people have opportunities to get better jobs, to get better educational opportunities, to spend more time with their kids. And that's really what we can do by thinking about what transit can do. Transit is at its best if we're running frequent service in strong corridors. That's what transit does best. You're going to have an hourly bus fortuitously running through a neighborhood. Frankly, I'd rather have Uber do that. What transit does well geometrically is a lot of straight routes with a lot of frequency and a lot of people at each of those spots. And what we've seen in Houston here is we can really rethink what local bus means and create a better life for an awful lot of people. So I'm happy to answer your questions about that.
which is why I really wanted to have him speak to us because of what he's achieving here. Gary?
You know, that's the exact same thing that we talked about in 2002 in Civic Federation when we had our transportation forum. The same thing, grid system, trying to create more direct routes, east-west, north-south, increased bus service, increased routes. You know, I think it's a wonderful thing. I'm glad to see a jurisdiction promoting what we did, what we suggested, 14, 15 years ago.
Yeah, so there was a good vision there.
Right.
Do you have a question? Or just
No, I wanted to thank Mr. Spieler for his presentation. I thought it was right on the money.
Okay. Anybody else have any? Thank you.
How do you convince your politicians to go for this?
I could give a whole long presentation on politically what it has taken to get there. I can tell you, I've gotten yelled at an awful lot when we started this process. I sort of warned my fellow board members that this is never easy. And the route plan is actually the easy part. It's the politics are the hard part. We are very lucky to have an absolutely awesome mayor who is rare among elected officials, that he actually enjoys doing things that are politically unpopular but will be good in the long term. I mean, really relishes those. So we were awfully lucky to have that kind of position. But it just took a lot of explaining. There's a lot of people, for example, who assume that simply because the bus routes go where they go today, it must be a sign that those are the logical routes for people to take. What's amazing about this debate is how few of the people involved in the discussion actually left us. So a big part of this has really been being out there and really explaining what are the shortcomings of the CARS network and how can we make it better. And that was a very large part of the process. So the willingness on the part of a transit board to take this on, the willingness on the part of elected officials to support this, and the willingness on the part of the staff who really understand, the transit agency staff totally understand what the right thing to do is, but they've gotten used to sort of getting beaten down whenever they try to do it. So giving the staff that support and giving them the latitude for radical change. We started this project by saying we want to change every route on the system. We didn't ask them to optimize individual routes. We said we want you to start over from a blank sheet of paper. And that's a radical question to ask. And that's what got us to this point.
Dick, do you have a question?
Yes, what you're basically arguing is ridership over coverage in many ways. And that is where we break down. We have a county executive, but a county council. And invariably, they will want to they'll argue for coverage in their area over the ridership of the major routes. Do you run into the same kind of an issue in Houston, even though you have a strong mayor?
Well, so overall, like I said, we were lucky enough to have a system that was so inefficient that we didn't actually lose coverage. We did figure out our old system was about 50% ridership and 50% coverage, and we moved our resources to about 80% ridership and 20% coverage. I mean, this is sort of one of the fundamental trade-offs of transit planning. You can serve a lot of places or you can carry a lot of people, but you can't do both. And so I think that approach, which was actually suggested by Jared Walker, one of the consultants on the project, is a really good one. To say we need to really explicitly talk about what the goal of our network is, and we need to allocate resources based on those goals. We will never have a system that has no coverage routes at all. There will always be neighborhoods that really need some sort of basic transit service, just to connect them to the rest of the county, connect them to the outside world, but the ridership will never justify it. We have those routes, we still have those routes. And we're saying just those routes on their merit. But what we discovered, and I would suspect Montgomery County is very similar, is we discovered discovered we had a lot of coverage routes in areas where if you just rethought the system, you could end up with something that looks more like a rider system. A lot of low frequency routes are actually fairly redundant. So that you could really rationalize that corridor and come up with something that's similar. So I think it's really important to realize there are trade-offs. This is not a no-pain kind of change. There are people whose trips will get worse, and there's about 70 people leaving service. But overall, you can make a lot of people's lives better. And I think one of the keys also on this project was we explicitly had that discussion. We had that discussion that this is a policy question. It's not a technical writing, it's a policy question about what do we want this system to do. And I think that having that conversation is really helpful.
The other point I would want to add is that the data analysis that's behind all of this new plan costs $1.2 million.
Gee.
So, yes?
No, I was going to say, I mean, there's an awful lot of work in this process.
Yeah.
A bang for the buck, compare this to a bunch of big capital improvements, it's amazing.
I
Jerry,
do
last
have another question. Did you find in Houston that you had, here in Montgomery County, we have an issue with capacity versus ridership. And when I talk about capacity, I talk about construction capacity, builder capacity for growth. And there seems to be a desire to invest in transit opportunities that provides capacity, or at least projected capacity, rather than actual ridership. Did you all have that same problem in Houston, and how did you overcome it?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's really interesting in transit planning. We tend to get caught up in discussion about modes. We tend to get caught up in discussion about the technical merits of different technologies. What I would say is, you know, if you design a transit system like this, you're going to have some lines which become your high demand lines. Those routes which connect to major destinations, which run frequently, you're going to get high ridership. And you want to look at those routes and say, what capital improvements make sense here? Part of what makes our system work is our light rail lines, and especially our Main Street line. We're carrying, built 10, 12 years ago. And the initial 7.5-mile line is carrying about 40,000 people, riders per mile that beats any other modern light rail line in the United States. And this system really utilizes that. It takes that and says that's the high capacity line running into downtown and running into the Texas Medical Center. And the bus routes can feed into that. They can cross that. They can provide the cross-town service. They can connect to it. So I think the goal should be start by building a robust system. And then if you created routes that have really high demand, then put in place the technology that provides the capacity.
Well, guys, I think we're hitting into sudden death overtime here. I really want to thank our speakers that that's really what we need here in Montgomery County is some new thinking on how to address these issues, because the old ways aren't going to work anymore, and there's lots of ideas here. And one of the things I think that Houston says is that intelligent transportation systems isn't just about computers and automation, but also thinking about transit systems and how you serve your communities more efficiently and more effectively, instead of just doing the same old thing. And hopefully we can influence our officials to do that.
Thanks, Jim. That was really fascinating program and really helpful.